The boy broke free from his father's grip in the middle of the gala. He didn't walk. He ran, weaving through designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, past crystal glasses and whispered conversations, until he stopped directly in front of a woman he had never met in his life. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. And in front of 400 of Seoul's most powerful people, the 5-year-old boy with the serious eyes and the stubborn jaw looked up at a black woman in a burgundy gown and asked the question that would unravel everything, "Are you my mom?" The room went silent. The billionaire didn't move a single step. And the woman, she couldn't breathe. Welcome to Afro Korean Story Empire. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from? I want to know which part of the world is about to feel this story, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now let's get back to the story. The security team moved first. 2 men in black earpieces began crossing the floor with the quiet efficiency of people trained to handle exactly this kind of scene. One reached for the boy's shoulder. "Don't touch him." Jae-min's voice cut through the ballroom like something cold and absolute. He hadn't raised it. He hadn't needed to. The security team stopped. Everyone stopped. Because Kang Jae-min, heir to the Kang Corporation, ranked 3rd on Korea's most powerful under-40 list, a man who had once shut down an entire government contract over a handshake he deemed disrespectful, had just issued a command that made no sense at all. His own son had just run across a crowded room and asked a stranger if she was his mother, and Jae-min was telling his team to stand down. The murmurs began rippling through the crowd. Slow at first, then faster, because everyone in that room knew who Jae-min was. Everyone knew his face, knew his reputation, knew the carefully constructed story of his life. The tragic widower, the devoted single father raising his son alone after losing his wife in a car accident 3 years ago. The cold, brilliant, untouchable man who had turned grief into power. They knew all of it, which was why none of them understood what they were watching. The boy hadn't moved from his spot. He was still looking up at the woman, his small hands hanging at his sides, completely unafraid. Like standing in front of her was the most natural thing he had ever done. The woman finally crouched down. She did it slowly, like someone approaching something fragile. Her gown pooled around her knees on the marble floor, and she brought herself to his eye level, and for a moment she simply looked at him, his dark eyes, his jaw, the particular way he held his chin slightly lifted like the world was something he was still deciding how to feel about. "Hey," she said softly. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "What's your name?" "Seo-jin," the boy said. "Kang Seo-jin." He studied her face the way children study things they are certain about. "You smell like my dream." The woman blinked. Something cracked in her chest, quick and sharp like ice splitting in spring. "Like your dream." He nodded, completely serious. "I dream about a voice that sings, it smells warm." He tilted his head. "You smell warm." Across the room, Jae-min had not moved a single step closer. He stood with a glass of whiskey he was no longer drinking, watching the scene with an expression his executive team had never seen on his face. Not anger, not embarrassment, something that looked dangerously close to terror. Because the woman straightening up from the floor, the woman his son had just run to with the certainty of someone following a compass home, the woman whose face had been stopping his breath for the past 4 minutes, he recognized her. And the recognition was doing something catastrophic to everything he had spent the last 6 years carefully building. Her name was Juliet and Jae-min. And the last time Jae-min had seen her, she was walking away from him in the rain outside Seoul National University's East Gate, her shoulders shaking, her face turned away from his, and he had told himself she was choosing to go. He had told himself she had never loved him. He had told himself she was gone because she wanted to be. He had told himself many things. Standing in a ballroom 6 years later, watching his 5-year-old son refuse to leave her side, Jae-min was beginning to understand exactly how many of those things were lies. Juliet straightened up fully and finally turned to look at the man across the room. Their eyes met for the first time in 6 years. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. The 6 years collapsed between them like paper, and what was left underneath was something raw and unresolved and still, somehow, alive. Seo-jin reached up and took Juliet's hand, just like that, like it was something he had always done. She looked down at their joined hands and her throat moved. The room watched everything. Jae-min finally set down his glass. It had started 4 years before Seo-jin was born, in a semester that should have been ordinary and became anything but. Juliet and Jae-min arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday in September, 23 years old, bright-eyed and underprepared for Korean winters, carrying a scholarship letter from the Korea-Africa Cultural Exchange Program and more ambition than luggage. She was doing her graduate internship at a communications firm in Gangnam, a firm that, as she discovered on her 3rd day, handled the public relations account for Kang Corporation. She was not supposed to meet Jae-min. Interns did not meet men like Jae-min. There were flaws between them, glass walls and access badges, and the simple geography of power that kept people like her on level 4 and men like him in the executive suite on level 31. But she had gotten lost. She would tell this story later in those early months when they could still laugh freely, and she always started the same way. I took the wrong elevator. She had meant to go to the print room on level 5. She had pressed what she thought was 5 and ended up on 31, and by the time she realized it, the doors were already opening, and she was stepping out into a corridor that was very clearly not where she was supposed to be. White marble, orchids, a view of the Han River that made her forget for 3 full seconds that she was an intern with a print job pending. Jae-min had been coming around the corner with 2 senior executives and a phone pressed to his ear. He had stopped when he saw her, not because she was in the wrong place. He hadn't known that yet. He stopped because she was staring out at the river with an expression of such unguarded wonder that it took him a moment to process that he was looking at a real person and not someone who belonged to a different, softer world than his. "Can I help you?" he said, and it came out flatter than he intended. She turned from the window, blinked at him, and then looked at the executives behind him and then at the orchids and then back at him. "I pressed 5, she said. "This is 31. I know that now." He looked at her. She looked at him. The 2 executives exchanged a glance. "The elevator bank on the left goes to floors 2 through 10, he said. "Thank you." She moved past him toward the elevator, then paused and turned back. "Nice view, by the way. You should look at it more often. Seems like you might be missing it." She was gone before he could respond. He stood there for a moment and then turned to look at the view she had been looking at. The Han River, silver and wide in the September light. He had walked past that window every single day for 3 years and he had never once stopped to look at it. He looked at it now. His executives said nothing. They were wise enough men. He found out who she was by the end of the week. Not in a sinister way, he simply asked the HR liaison which interns were currently assigned to the communications floor, and one of the names was Ademi, J, Korea-Africa Exchange Program, Nigeria, communications graduate student. He did not act on the information. He wasn't built for that kind of impulsiveness. He filed it away and returned to his work, and told himself the moment on floor 31 was nothing more than a brief interruption. Then he saw her again in the coffee line on level 2, 3 weeks later, and she was arguing politely but firmly with the barista about the sugar content in her order, and something in his chest moved in a way he did not have vocabulary for. He ordered his coffee, she collected hers. She glanced over, recognized him, and nodded with the complete ease of someone who had not spent 3 weeks thinking about the encounter. He found that almost offensive. "You work here," he said. "Level 4, she said. "Intern, you can relax." "I am relaxed." She looked at him in a way that suggested she disagreed but was choosing not to make it a conversation. She picked up her coffee. "See you around, level 31. She walked away. He stood there with his coffee and realized he was, in fact, not relaxed. It escalated slowly and then all at once, the way these things always do. He found reasons to review projects that crossed her floor. She found out quickly what he was doing and called him out on it matter-of-factly in the middle of a hallway with zero apparent fear of the fact that he could end her internship with a phone call. "You keep showing up on level 4, she said. "You could just say hello." "I was reviewing the Hyundai account." "The Hyundai account is on level 6. Pause. "Hello," he said. She laughed. It was the first time he had heard it. It did something violent to his composure. They started having coffee. Just coffee, just 15 minutes in the building cafe, just twice a week. He told himself it was nothing. She brought things into those 15 minutes that he hadn't experienced in years, real opinions, real laughter, an absolute refusal to treat him like a person to be managed or impressed. She argued with him about architecture. She told him he was wrong about jazz. She asked him questions no one ever asked him. Things like, what do you actually enjoy, not what do you achieve, what do you enjoy? He didn't have an answer. He had to think about it for 3 days. When he came back and said woodworking, she had looked at him with such genuine delight that he felt, briefly and alarmingly, like someone worth knowing. He was falling in love with her. He understood this. He also understood that it was complicated in ways that went beyond the simple mathematics of power and intern status. His family had expectations. The Kang name carried obligations that had been explained to him in full, formal terms before he turned 18. He was expected to marry within a specific world, the world of old soul money, the world of approved surnames and approved bloodlines and approved ambitions. He understood all of this. He fell in love with her anyway. By November he was taking her to places that had nothing to do with the building. A woodwork museum she had spotted in a magazine, a night market where nobody knew his face, a small gallery in Hongdae where she stood in front of a painting for so long he started studying her face instead of the canvas because it was more interesting. She noticed. She turned and caught him looking and she didn't look away. "Jae-min," she said. "Yes." "Don't start something you're not prepared to finish." He looked at her for a long moment. "I've never been unprepared for anything in my life." "That's not the same as being brave," she said. He took her hand right there in the gallery in front of everyone. It was, for Kang Jae-min, a radical act. She laced her fingers through his and turned back to the painting. He had never felt so unguarded in his life. With her, the armor he had been wearing since his father made it clear at age 12 that softness was a liability, that armor came off. He didn't know how she did it. She didn't try. She simply refused to pretend with him, and so he stopped pretending too, and what was underneath was something quiet and frightened, and in her presence no longer afraid of itself. They were together for 8 months. The pregnancy was not planned. It also was not, in the quiet, honest space they had built between them, unwelcome. Juliet found out on a Thursday morning in April. She sat on the edge of her apartment bathtub for a long time, looking at the test, doing the math of her life with a clarity that was both frightening and, underneath everything, suffused with a warmth she couldn't fully explain. She called him that evening. She needed to tell him in person, needed to see his face. She never got the chance. Because that same evening, while she was rehearsing how to say it, 2 things happened simultaneously. Jae-min's father, Kang Byung-ho, had finally, decisively, become aware of the relationship. And Park Jae-soo, the daughter of a rival conglomerate family, the woman the Kang family had quietly designated for Jae-min for the better part of 2 years, was at the family's Seongbuk-dong residence for dinner. The conversation between Jae-min and his father lasted 47 minutes. Jae-min did not tell his father about the pregnancy because he did not yet know, but he fought. He fought harder than he had fought for anything in his life. He told his father that he would not give her up, that she was not something to be managed, that he was 30 years old and capable of choosing his own life. His father listened to all of it. Then he told Jae-min exactly what would happen if he continued, not threats. Kang Byung-ho did not make threats. He stated outcomes. He outlined, with the precision of a man who had spent 40 years understanding how power worked, what would happen to Juliet's scholarship if certain information reached certain committee members. What would happen to the communications firm's contract with Kang Corporation? What would happen to the small NGO in Lagos that Juliet's mother ran, the one that had been receiving anonymous international infrastructure funding that could, circumstances permitting, be redirected? Jae-min went very still. "You wouldn't," he said. His father looked at him with something that wasn't cruelty but was far worse, certainty. "She is a complication," his father said, "and the Kang family does not accommodate complications." He went to see Juliet that night. He had intended to tell her everything. He had intended to fight in a different direction, to find a way to protect her, to be the person she had told him he was capable of being. He had driven to her apartment in Mapogu with his hands tight on the steering wheel and his jaw set, and a resolution that felt in the car like something solid. But she had opened the door and seen his face, and before he could speak she had said, "What happened?" And something in him had fractured in a way that was not fixable in one night. He told her about the conversation with his father. He told her about the threats, not all of them, not the worst of them, but enough. He watched her face as he spoke, watched her absorb it, watched the warmth in her eyes go careful and contained. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to protect you," he said. "I need time, I need to." "Jae-min," her voice was quiet. "What do you want to do?" He should have said, "I want to stay." He should have said, "There is something else, something I need to tell you, something that changes everything." He should have asked her why her hands were shaking before he arrived, should have asked why there was a pharmacy bag on the kitchen counter, should have stayed long enough to hear the thing she had been building the courage to say. He didn't. He said he needed a few days to find a solution that didn't expose her to what his father was capable of. He said it like it was a reasonable thing, like time was something they had in abundance. He left. He never got those few days. Because the following morning, Juliet received a visitor, a woman named Choi Yoon-young, senior counsel for Kang Corporation, and as she made clear within 30 seconds of sitting down, a person who handled problems. She sat in Juliet's small apartment kitchen, and she explained with professional gentleness the full scope of what had been outlined the night before, plus details Jae-min hadn't mentioned: the scholarship committee, the firm's contract, her mother's NGO. And then she said the thing that Jae-min had not known, had not sanctioned, had not been told about. We are also aware, Choi Yoon-young said carefully, that there may be a recent development of a personal nature. In the event that is the case, I want you to understand that the family is prepared to offer significant financial support for the appropriate resolution, everything handled privately, everything arranged. Juliet understood what she was being offered. She also understood something deeper, something that settled through her like cold water, that this family had resources she could not fight, and that staying would not only expose her to those resources but would expose her child to a world that had already begun managing its existence before it was even born. She packed in 3 hours. She sent Jae-min a message, "I'm going. This isn't your fault, don't look for me." She was on a flight to Lagos within 36 hours. She spent the flight with her hands on her still flat stomach, and she made a decision that felt like tearing something from her own body. She would have this child. She would keep this child. And she would build a life far away from the Kang family's reach. Far away from the world that had already started drawing borders around her before she had even arrived. She arrived in Lagos. She started over. She was 7 weeks pregnant and she was starting over. She would spend the next 8 months building something new, something quiet and entirely hers while the baby inside her grew. The call came in her 8th month. She had been careful. She had not shared her location with anyone connected to Korea, had not reached back, had been building something quiet and small and hers. And then the call came, a number she didn't know, a woman's voice she didn't recognize, speaking in careful English. The woman said she was calling from the clinic where Juliet had registered her prenatal care in Lagos. There had been a concern flagged at her most recent scan, she said. At 34 weeks the baby's positioning needed specialist review. There was a recommended physician in Abuja, a very good one. The woman had the details if Juliet wanted them. Everything about the call felt real. The woman knew her clinic's name. She knew Juliet's file number. She knew the name of the midwife Juliet had been seeing. Juliet wrote down the specialist's details and told herself she was being careful by following up. She told herself that this was what responsible mothers did. She took the overnight bus to Abuja. The clinic was real. That was the thing that stayed with her for years afterward, how real all of it was. The building was clean and properly staffed, with framed certifications on the walls and a receptionist who smiled and took her name and offered her water while she waited. The waiting room had soft lighting and a television mounted in the corner showing a nature program. There were other women waiting. Everything smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint. The specialist who came to collect her was a man in his 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a calm, reassuring manner. He introduced himself as Dr. Emeka Osai. He shook her hand. He told her he had reviewed the notes forwarded from her Lagos clinic and that he wanted to do a comprehensive scan before they discussed anything further. "Is it serious?" Juliet asked. "Let's look first," he said, calm, professional. "There's no benefit in speculating before we have clear images." She followed him down a corridor. She noticed, in the peripheral way you notice things when you are trying not to be afraid, that the corridor was longer than she had expected, that they turned twice, that the room they entered was further from the reception than it should have been for a facility this size. She told herself she was being paranoid. Pregnant women were afraid of everything. It was physiological. The ultrasound technician was a young woman who barely spoke. She moved efficiently, applied the gel, positioned the probe. The screen faced away from Juliet. "Can I see?" Juliet asked. "Dr. Osai will review the images and discuss them with you directly," the technician said without looking up. "I'd like to see the screen," Juliet said more firmly this time. "It's standard procedure here," the technician said. "The doctor reviews first." Juliet opened her mouth to push back and Dr. Osai returned right at that moment with the precise timing of someone who had been waiting just outside the door. "We're seeing something that requires immediate attention," he said. His voice was still calm, still reassuring. That was what frightened her most, that he never once dropped the reassuring tone. "Nothing that isn't manageable, but time is a factor. We'd like to administer a mild sedative to keep your stress levels down while we do a more detailed procedure. Stress in these situations can compound the risk to the fetus." Juliet sat up on the examination table, the paper crinkled beneath her. "What kind of procedure?" "A more thorough internal assessment, completely safe. We do this regularly." "What exactly did the scan show?" "I'll explain everything in detail once you're comfortable. The sedative is very mild, you'll be awake but calm." "I don't want a sedative," she said. "I want you to explain to me right now what is wrong with my baby." Something shifted in the room. It was subtle, a micro-adjustment in the doctor's expression, the technician becoming very still. If Juliet had been less sharp, she would have missed it. "Ms. Ademi," Dr. Osai said, "I understand the anxiety. But I want to assure you, You haven't answered my question, she said. Her voice was rising, she didn't try to stop it. What did the scan show specifically? What abnormality? What are the measurements? What trimester risk category are we in? She had spent months reading everything she could find about fetal development. She had questions ready for every scenario. She had been preparing for this appointment since the phone call. She asked 5 specific clinical questions in rapid succession, the kind of questions that required real answers, not reassurances. Dr. Osai looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered, and his answers were close enough to plausible that she couldn't immediately disprove them, but not quite specific enough to fully satisfy her, and in the gap between those two things lived a fear that was beginning to feel less like anxiety and more like instinct. I want to call someone before any procedure, she said. I want to call my mother. Of course, he said immediately. Absolutely, take all the time you need. She reached for her phone, the signal was low 1 bar, the clinic was on the edge of the city. She tried twice to connect the call, both times it dropped before it went through. She looked up and the technician had left the room. It was just her and Dr. Osai. There's better signal in the consultation suite, he said gently. Just down the hall, I'll take you there. She followed him. She didn't know afterward why she followed him. She thought about it for years. The only answer she ever arrived at was that her body was 8 months pregnant and exhausted and afraid, and the fear of something being wrong with her child was, in that moment, bigger than the fear of the people around her. The consultation suite had a couch and 2 chairs and a small table with a glass of water already waiting. The signal on her phone was still low. She tried her mother's number again. It rang once and dropped. Just give it a moment, Dr. Osa said from behind her. She turned. There was a nurse she hadn't seen before standing in the doorway. She was holding something, a small tray, a syringe. What is that? Juliet said. Just something to keep you calm during. No, she stepped back. No, I said I didn't want. Mr. Jae-min. His voice was no longer reassuring. It had gone flat and certain in a way she recognized immediately, because she had heard that tone once before in her life, in a kitchen in Seoul, from a woman named Choi Yoon-young who also had paperwork and also had certainty, and also had a plan that Juliet was not part of. This is for the safety of your child. She tried to move past him. She was 8 months pregnant and he was a large man and the nurse was already in the room and the door was behind both of them, and she fought, she did fight. She knocked the tray from the nurse's hands and it clattered across the floor and she screamed once, loud, real, the kind of scream that came from somewhere older than fear. Nobody came. She felt the needle anyway, the room tilted. The couch caught her. She heard Dr. Osai say something to the nurse in a voice that was low and businesslike, and then the light in the room began pulling away from the edges, and the last thing she was aware of before consciousness left her entirely was her own hand on her stomach. Just her hand pressing gently, like a goodbye she wasn't ready to give. She woke up in a recovery room. It took her several seconds to understand where she was. The ceiling was white. There was a monitor beside the bed making a soft, regular sound. Her mouth was dry and her body felt hollowed out and wrong in a way she couldn't immediately locate. Then she understood, her stomach. She pressed both hands to her stomach and what she felt, the absence of the specific weight she had been carrying for 8 months, the changed geography of her own body, hit her before any words did. A nurse appeared at her side. Where is my baby? Juliet's voice came out barely above a whisper. The nurse's face was composed in the particular way of people who have been trained to deliver difficult information. The doctor will come and speak with you very soon. Where is my baby? The doctor who came was not Dr. Osai. It was a woman she had never seen younger, with a file folder in her hands and the expression of someone who had drawn the short straw. Mr. Jae-min, she said, I'm very sorry to tell you that the complication was more severe than our initial assessment indicated. Despite our best efforts, no. The word came out of Juliet before she knew she was going to say it, not as a question, as a refusal. The fetal distress escalated rapidly during. No, she was sitting up now. Her body screamed at the movement and she ignored it. Show me the records, show me exactly what happened. I want to see the procedure notes, I want to see the time codes. The woman with the folder looked at her for a long moment. I understand this is devastating. Show me the records, Juliet said again. Her voice had gone somewhere very cold and very still, the place inside her that fear couldn't reach because it was made of something harder than fear. If my child died in this facility, I have a legal right to every piece of documentation. Show me. Right now. The folder the woman produced had documentation. It had timestamps and procedure codes and clinical language. Juliet read every word of it twice with the IV still in her arm and the monitor still beeping and the nurse hovering at the door. She read it with the analytical attention of someone who had spent the last 5 months reading everything she could find about what should and should not happen during a pregnancy. Something was wrong with the timeline. A 20-minute gap she couldn't account for. A notation that referenced a consent form she had no memory of signing. She asked about both. The responses she received were smooth and practiced and slightly too fast. She was given a death certificate. She was given a small printed card with a grief counseling number. She was told she could take as much time as she needed. She was offered more water. She sat in that recovery room for a long time after they left, long enough that the light through the window moved from afternoon to early evening. She sat completely still with the papers in her lap and her hands on her stomach, and a grief so enormous and so confused that it didn't feel like grief yet. It felt like standing at the edge of something she couldn't see the bottom of. She would not know the full truth for 6 years, but something in her body, some signal older than knowledge, older than logic, never fully accepted the story she had been handed. It sat in her like a stone she couldn't put down. She would go weeks without feeling it, and then it would be there again, smooth and cold and certain at 3 a.m. in the space between sleeping and waking, a feeling that the mathematics of her loss didn't add up. She had been right, she just didn't know it yet. Now sitting across from Jae-min in the thinning gala with Seoul asleep against her side, that stone was still there. But it was no longer cold. She looked at the boy, at the curve of his ear. The particular way his lashes rested against his cheek when he slept. She thought about a recovery room in Abuja and a ceiling that was white and a grief that had never fully made sense. She thought, you were there the whole time. And then she looked at Jae-min across the table, and the years between them felt suddenly very heavy and very specific, like something she was being asked to lift and wasn't yet sure she had the strength for. "He's 5, Jae-min said. His voice was controlled but not by much. "I know," she didn't look up, "the math isn't hard." "Juliet, he has a birthmark," she said, her voice was very quiet. "Left shoulder, I can't see it from here but—" She stopped, started again. "I had a dream 3 nights after I woke up in that recovery room in Abuja. I dreamed I had a boy. He had a birthmark on his left shoulder shaped like a leaf." She finally looked up. "I told myself it was just grief doing what grief does." Jae-min's jaw tightened. "I want a DNA test," she said. "Yes," he said immediately. She blinked. She had expected resistance. She had prepared for resistance. "I'll arrange it tonight," he said. "Discreet lab, results in 48 hours. "You're not going to ask me why I think, because I already know," he said. The words came out rough. "Because I've known something was wrong for 5 years and I chose not to look at it directly because looking at it directly meant looking at what my family is capable of." He paused. "What my family did." The word sat between them like a verdict. Juliet looked at Seojin's sleeping face, at his jaw, at the particular set of his eyes, at the way he was holding her arm even in sleep, the grip of someone who had found something and intended to keep it. "He called me Mom," she said. "He's never met me in his life and he called me Mom." "He talks about a voice," Jae-min said quietly. "A voice that sings. He's talked about it since he was 3. I never—" He stopped. He pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. "I didn't know what it meant." "I used to sing," Juliet said. "When I was pregnant, I had a playlist. I sang along to it every night." She looked at Jae-min with something in her eyes that was not warmth and was not hatred. It was the look of someone standing in the ruins of something that was once very beautiful, trying to figure out whether the ground was solid enough to stand on. "If this test comes back the way I think it's going to come back, Jae-min, I need you to understand that I'm going to need the full truth, not the version that protects your family, the full truth." "You'll have it," he said. "I also need you to understand," she said, "that I am not the same person I was in Seoul. I was 23 and I was in love with you and I was out of my depth and they knew exactly how to use all of that against me. I am 31 now. I have a company. I have a life and I have spent 6 years not falling apart, which cost me more than you know." She looked at him directly. "So if this is real, if he is mine, you don't get to manage how this goes. Not you and not your family." "My family," Jae-min said, and his voice dropped to something so controlled it was almost frightening, "will have nothing to say about how this goes. Not anymore." The DNA test results came back 47 hours later on a Friday morning. Jae-min sat at his desk and stared at the notification on his screen for a full minute before he opened it. He had been awake since 4. He had not eaten breakfast. He was a man who had navigated hostile board takeovers and government inquiries and the loss of his wife with his composure entirely intact, and he was sitting at his desk at 8 in the morning unable to open an email. He opened it. He read the first line. He sat back in his chair. He read it again, slowly, every word, the clinical language of probability and genetic markers and percentage matches, and underneath all of that precise scientific language was a truth so enormous that the room felt different after it than it had before. He picked up his phone. He called Juliet. His hand, pressing the phone to his ear, was not entirely steady. She picked up on the second ring. The silence before he spoke lasted longer than he intended. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, controlled, waiting. He understood from that breathing that she had also been awake. The results came, he said. She said nothing. He heard the faint sound of her exhaling. Juliet. He stopped. He tried again. He's yours. The words came out broken at the edges. He is yours. The line went very quiet, not silent. He could still hear her breathing. But the quality of the silence changed completely, became something dense and pressurized, like the moment before weather breaks. Say it again, she whispered. He is your son, Jae-min said. The test confirms it. 100% he is yours. What happened on her end of that line was something she would never fully describe to anyone, not even to herself, not in language. It began in her chest, a cracking, expanding thing like a door that had been sealed for 6 years finally giving way all at once. She had prepared herself for this call. She had told herself she was ready. She had rehearsed composure. She had spent 6 years practicing composure. None of it held. Her hand found her mouth before the sound came out. She pressed hard. Her eyes were burning and her throat was closing, and her whole body was shaking with the effort of staying upright against something that was simultaneously the worst and most necessary thing she had ever felt. 6 years of grief and 6 years of suppression and 6 years of a stone she couldn't put down, all of it rising at once, in a hotel room in Seoul on a Friday morning because a child who was alive had always been alive. Juliet. Jae-min's voice on the phone, very quiet. She couldn't speak yet. She held the phone and she pressed her other hand to her own chest and she let herself for exactly that moment come completely apart. Not the elegant grief of someone who has processed their loss. The raw, ugly, gasping grief of someone learning that their loss was manufactured. 30 seconds, maybe 40. She gave herself that and no more. Then she breathed, once, twice. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She straightened up from where she had bent over the desk without realizing she was doing it. I want to see him, she said. Her voice was thick, but it was there. I know. His was not much steadier. I'll bring him to you this afternoon. She put the phone down and stood very still in the center of the hotel room. Her reflection in the mirror across the room showed her a woman she barely recognized, eyes red, chin lifted, hands at her sides, spine absolutely straight. She looked at herself for a long moment. Then she walked to the bathroom, turned on the cold tap and put her face under the water. Then she came back out and started making a list. Jae-min confronted his father that same morning. He had called ahead. He had said there was something that required an in-person conversation. He had used a tone that gave nothing away. Kang Byung-ho received him in the study of the Seongbuk-dong house, seated behind the same desk he had occupied for 30 years, with the unhurried authority of a man who had never in his life been caught unprepared for anything. He gestured to the chair across from him. Jae-min did not sit. The woman at the gala, Jae-min said. His father's expression registered a mild, polite interest. I saw there was some kind of scene. These things happen at public events. If the child is becoming difficult to manage in social. Her name is Juliet and Jae-min, Jae-min said. You know that name. The mildness in his father's expression didn't shift exactly. It settled, became more deliberate. Jae-min, if this is about that intern from some years ago. It is. Jae-min placed a single sheet of paper on the desk. A printed summary of the DNA results. That is a paternity and maternity confirmation. The boy is hers, Seo-jin is her son. His father looked at the paper. He looked at it for longer than a man who had nothing to hide needed to. Then he sat back in his chair and folded his hands on the desk with the practiced stillness of someone buying time to recalculate. DNA tests are not infallible, he said. Laboratories can be compromised. Results can be. Don't. Jae-min's voice came out with a quiet force that stopped his father mid-sentence. I used 3 separate laboratories. Independent verification. The probability of error across all 3 is statistically non-existent. He paused. I also have the bank transfer records. Something moved in his father's eyes. The first real movement. I have records of a private account, controlled by legal counsel associated with this family, that funded a specialist clinic in Abuja, Nigeria in the spring of 2020. Jae-min's voice was even. It cost him enormously to keep it even. I have the account number. I have the dates. I have correspondence that references a Ms. A and a procedure and a certificate of loss. His father was silent. I want to hear you say it, Jae-min said. Jae-min, I want to hear you say what was done. What was done, his father said, and his voice carried the faint, infuriating composure of a man who had decided that honesty at this point was simply a different kind of strategy, was necessary. You were not in a position to see clearly. You were making choices based on emotion that would have damaged this family irreparably. The woman she was carrying my son. The words came out very low, very precise. She was alone in a foreign city, 5 months pregnant, and your people sedated her and took her child and gave him to me and told her he was dead. His father did not flinch. That was the thing that Jae-min had known somewhere he would have to survive. His father would not flinch. The boy was given a good life, his father said. He has been raised with every advantage. The woman has rebuilt her life. These are not the outcomes of recklessness. Stop. Jae-min put both hands on the desk and leaned forward, and something in his face made his father, for the first time in Jae-min's memory, go quiet without finishing the sentence. You took a child from his mother. You took him from her and you lied to both of us for 6 years. You let me raise my own son believing his mother had abandoned him. You let that boy ask me over and over why he dreams about a voice that sings, and I had no answer to give him because you made sure I wouldn't. He straightened up. I'm not here for your justifications. I'm here to tell you that you will not have further access to Seojin until I have determined what that looks like going forward, and the woman you harmed is retaining legal counsel. I will not be interfering with that process. His father looked at him, a long, measuring look. You're going to let her pursue legal action against this family. I'm going to step back and let the truth go where it needs to go, Jae-min said, which is what I should have done 6 years ago. He left the house. He did not look back. Seojin met Juliet for the second time on a Friday afternoon in the garden of the hotel, under a paulownia tree that was just beginning to bloom. Jae-min had explained to him, in the careful language of a father choosing words for a 5-year-old, that there was someone who very much wanted to meet him. He had said, the lady from the gala. Do you remember her? Seojin had given his father a look that communicated without words that this was not a difficult question. Juliet was already in the garden when they came through the gate. She had arrived early. She had told herself it was because she wanted time to collect herself, but the truth was simpler. She couldn't stay in the hotel room any longer. She had been packing for 40 minutes. She had changed her earrings twice for no reason she could name. She stood when she heard the gate, and then she saw them, Jae-min's hand on the small of Seojin's back, the boy walking beside him with his usual deliberate pace, and something in her chest tightened so severely that she had to remind herself how to breathe. She didn't move toward them. She waited. Her hands were folded together in front of her, and she was very aware of both of them, of how still she was holding herself, of the enormous effort of not running. Seojin stopped a few feet away. He looked at her with those serious eyes and he tilted his head, the same small gesture he had made in the ballroom, and then he closed the remaining distance between them himself. He stood in front of her. You came back, he said. She crouched down, slowly. She had promised herself she would go at his pace, whatever pace that was. She would not reach for him, she would not overwhelm him. She had made all these careful rules. I didn't go anywhere, she said, her voice only barely held. I was just lost for a while, but I'm here now. Seojin considered this with the gravity it deserved. Then he said, I told Appa you would come. He said he didn't know, but I knew. She couldn't speak for a moment. How did you know? She managed. He thought about it with genuine seriousness. Because the dream doesn't go away until the real thing comes, he said. That's how you know a dream is important. Behind him, Jae-min had gone very still. Juliet pressed her lips together. She nodded slowly at the boy like this was the most logical thing she had ever heard. Seojin sat down on the bench beside where she had been sitting, easy and unhurried, like this was a place he had always planned to be. He looked up at Jae-min. You can sit too, Appa. Jae-min came and sat on the other side of him. The three of them on the bench under the paulownia tree, with the blossoms coming in overhead and the city a distant sound past the garden wall. Juliet looked at Jae-min across the boy between them, the distance and everything inside it. She looked at him for a long moment and then she looked away because there was too much there to hold all at once. He's brave, she said quietly. Not to Jae-min exactly, not to anyone in particular. He gets it from somewhere, Jae-min said. His voice was rough. Seojin, who had been examining a small stone he'd found at the base of the bench, held it up to the light with the focused attention of a scientist. Then he turned to Juliet and held it out. For you, he said. She took it from his palm, a smooth grey stone, unremarkable, perfect. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. He went back to looking for another one. Then, without looking up, with the casual certainty of someone stating a fact about the weather, he said, I'm going to call you Mama. Juliet's hand closed around the stone. Jae-min looked at her. She was looking down at the stone in her fist, and there were tears moving down her face that she hadn't tried to stop, and she was letting them fall the way you let rain fall without trying to be somewhere else. He didn't say anything. There was nothing adequate. He sat with her in the garden while the paulownia blossomed, and his son narrated the qualities of every stone he found, and he let the weight of all of it sit where it needed to sit, the years, the loss, the damage, the staggering, unearned grace of this afternoon, without trying to manage it into something smaller. After a long time, Seo-jin looked up at both of them with the evaluating expression he sometimes got when he was assessing a situation. "Why are you sad?" he asked. He was looking at Juliet, but the question seemed to include Jae-min. "We're not sad," Juliet said. "You're crying." "Sometimes," she said carefully, "you cry because something is better than you expected, not because it's bad." Seo-jin absorbed this. He looked at his father. "Is that true?" Jae-min looked at Juliet, at the stone in her hand, at the way she was sitting, not leaning toward him, not closed off, just present, just here, just beginning. "Yes," he said, "that's true." Seo-jin nodded and returned to his stone collection, satisfied. Juliet would not forgive everything in a Friday afternoon. She was not built for that, and the damage was not the kind that forgiveness could reach quickly or cleanly. There would be lawyers and long conversations and nights. She would lie awake reconstructing the specific shape of what had been done to her. There would be moments between her and Jae-min that were honest in ways that hurt. There would be questions she asked that he didn't have good enough answers for. There would be distance she insisted on, because some things need distance before they can become anything else. But the boy was real. The boy was beside her, picking up stones and handing her the best ones, and he had called her Mama with the same ease with which he had run across a ballroom, and something she had buried so deep she had almost stopped believing it was, improbably and against everything, still alive. She opened her hand and looked at the small grey stone. She closed it again. She was still holding it when the sun moved behind the paulownia tree, and the garden went golden and quiet, and Seo-jin fell asleep between them with his head on her arm and his feet across Jae-min's lap, as though he had simply decided that this was where he belonged and saw no reason to argue with himself about it. The truth had taken 6 years to arrive. It was bigger than the lie that had replaced it, and heavier, and so much more worth carrying. And if this story reached something in you today, if you felt even a fraction of what Juliet felt in that recovery room, or what Seo-jin knew before anyone else did, then hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't, because there are more stories like this one waiting for you, and you don't want to miss them. And leave me a comment. Did you want Juliet to fully open the door to Jae-min, or did she do exactly the right thing by leaving it only halfway? Tell me below. I will read every single one.